Tanya for the 22nd day of Sivan is in Perek Zayin, chapter 7 of Shari Yuchad V'Emunah. It's on page 164. The number at the bottom of the page is 312. It's in the middle of the page at the period. V'hinei ma'asher nemar, with what was said before, above, is Yuvan, we will now understand, ma'asher kosuv, that which is written, Ani Hashem leisha nisi. I, God, have not changed. In other words, the creation of the world did not produce a change in God. Pirush, how is it that the world does not create a change? That there is no change at all in God's oneness, that just as He was alone, the only existence before the creation of the world, the same way He is alone after the world was created. And this is what we say in the davening, you are the one who existed before the world was created, and the repetition of Atahu, instead of saying you are the one before and after, it says you are the one before and you are the one after creation, which emphasizes that there's been no change. The same one, the oneness that was before, is also after. The li shum shinli bi'atzmusei, without any change in God at all. Le bedaitei, and also not in God's knowledge. You would think that even if God is not affected, God Himself is not changed by the existence of the world, but certainly there's been a change in God's knowledge, because before there was no world, and therefore there was nothing to know. Now there is a world, and He knows the world, so there's been an increase in God's knowledge. So the truth is that there is no change in His knowledge. Why? Because God's knowledge is such that in knowing Himself, He knows all of creation. As we'll soon explain, the nature or the condition of God's knowledge. Because everything comes from Him. And is totally insignificant and non-existent to Him. And as the Rambam writes, that God is the knowing and the knower and the knowledge. In the human being, there are three distinct parts. There is a person. He is the one who knows. There is his intelligence, with which he knows, his faculty, his ability to know. And then there is the subject, which he is knowing, which he is studying, becoming aware of. So there are three separate realities, three separate subjects. But in God, they're all the same. He is the one who knows. He knows not with the faculty of intelligence. He knows with Himself. And what He knows is Himself, because there's nothing besides Him. And this condition, we have no words with which to express it, and we don't have the capacity to hear it or to understand it. And it's not within our capacity to comprehend it clearly. Because with God, He and His knowledge are one from all directions, united from all sides, the whole derech yichud in every form of oneness. And His awareness, His knowledge, is not something in addition to His essence, as it is kameshahu b'nefesh ha'adam, as it is in the human soul, shedaita dover nesef al muhusa, where the knowledge of the person, a person's knowledge, is something added to the person himself. Umurkav bo, and therefore there is a construct the being is put together of parts, the human being is put together of parts, and therefore there can be an increase or decrease in his knowledge and in his awareness. Because when a person learns and acquires some knowledge or some information, there already existed the capacity for knowledge. His intelligence already existed before, independent of this piece of knowledge. So then when he goes and he studies, and he acquires this new information, there is an increase in his nefesh, in the intelligence of the person. There's an increase, even though there was intelligence there before. Which means that although the information is absorbed by the nefesh, and it becomes united with the nefesh, you now say that the person knows. It's not that the person has a piece of information, like something you keep in a pocket. It has become absorbed into the nefesh, and now the person knows this information, this knowledge, yet it is a oneness that is put together. The same happens every day. There's an increase of new information. That in the passage of time there's an increase of wisdom. So although the neshama is absorbing it and the information becomes one with the neshama, but ein zu achdus pshuta. This is not a true or absolute oneness. An absolute oneness is a condition in which there are two things that can't be separate. When two things that are basically separate become joined, that's called a composite being, but not a perfect oneness. Elo murkeves, it is a composite. The oneness is made up of parts. So although in fact they become one, but they are two things that have become one. But with God, who achdus poshut belishum hakovo, there is an absolute oneness and not a composite oneness. V'tzad ribui klal, and there is no element of increase at all. There can't be any increase. To understand this a little bit, although the Rambam says that it can't be understood, but the Rambam says it can't be understood clearly. But a little bit of understanding we can have from an explanation elsewhere in Chassidus, where it explains that there is a knowledge that comes from the subject which we're studying, and there's a knowledge that comes from the person who is studying. Let's use a physical example. A person's movement is restricted by space, by distance. So that, for example, a person can only walk so far before he gets tired. A stronger person can walk a little bit further. But even the stronger person has his limit, how long you can walk before you become tired. Which means that distance, space, has an effect on the person's ability on the person's movement, mobility. He can only travel so much at a given time. And therefore there can be increase or decrease. There can be a larger amount of space or a shorter amount of space. One person can walk only 1 mile, the other person can walk 2 miles. Or even the person himself, one day he can walk 1 mile, the next day he's a little bit healthier, he can walk 2 miles. So when he walks the second mile, he has increased, he has gained something over yesterday. An additional mile. Well, the same would be true, for example, a person to throw something. You can throw something 30 feet or 90 feet or 100 feet. That depends on how strong you are. And the further you throw it, every additional foot is an increase in your ability and in your accomplishment. But let's consider another fact, a physical fact. The person who can walk only 1 mile a day can walk that 1 mile in any one of the 4 directions. He can walk to the east, he can walk to the west. And why is that? Why is it that there is a restriction as to how far he can walk, but there's no restriction as to which direction he can walk? There's no such thing as certain people who are better at walking to the east, other people are better at walking to the west. The direction in which you're walking has no effect on your ability to walk. And the same with throwing. What direction you throw the ball doesn't seem to make any difference. The distance you throw it does make a difference. So why is it that a person can throw in any direction or walk in any direction? It's because direction has no bearing on your ability to walk or throw. So it's not that the person who can throw in all 4 directions has 4 talents, 4 abilities. He has one ability, and that is to walk or to throw. And that ability is not affected and is not restrained and not restricted by direction. Other things restricted, but direction has no bearing on it. And therefore, when we say that the person can throw in 4 directions, we're not talking about 4 abilities. The directions are meaningless, are non-existent relative to the person's ability to walk. Now let's apply this to knowledge. When we say that a person can know many things, we're talking about the things as they exist in their dimensions and with their properties. And that's why a person with a better mind can understand concepts that are more abstract, more subtle. A person with a crass mind, a coarse mind, can only understand concrete and simple subjects. With each additional subject that a person understands, there is an increase in his knowledge. Why is there an increase? Because he's understanding the subjects as they exist in their condition. With the characteristics of the subject. Therefore, one subject is separate from another. If he understands one subject, that's only one subject to his credit. If he understands 2, he has 2 subjects. He has mastered another subject. Because in order to gain that second subject, he has to go into the condition, into the properties of that subject and master it there. His mind has to take on the form and the shape of that particular subject. And since every subject is independent and separate, with each subject that he masters, he has gained another subject. So that by the human being knows a subject by investing himself into that subject. Therefore, there can be an increase in knowledge, and there is an increase in knowledge in the human being with every new subject that he learns. So that every day that goes by, he becomes a little bit smarter, because he has gained another piece of information. But when we say that God knows, and he knows with himself, he is the knowledge, he is the knower, and so on, what that means, or the way that it could work, is that God's knowledge is not an aggressive assault on the subject, which is the way it is with the human mind. With God, everything is contained within him. The fact that he knows things is not because he considers them and masters them. He knows them because there is no not knowing in God. He knows them because he is everything, not because he goes out and studies everything. Just like the person who can throw in all 4 directions, it's not because he has 4 talents and he has mastered each of the directions. He has the ability to throw anywhere. And that anywhere includes the 4 directions. If there were 5 directions, if there existed 5 directions, he would be able to throw in 5 directions. And that also would not be an increase in his talent. Because his talent doesn't consist of 4 directions. His talent consists of an unrestricted ability to throw in every direction. The distance restricts him, but not the directions. So that even if there were 10 directions, if there existed 10 directions, he would be able to throw in all 10. Not because he would have gained more talent, but because this particular talent is not restrained, and therefore it includes everything, but automatically. And because it includes everything, there can be no increase. So we can't say that if God knows 10 things, it's more than if he knew 8 things. Now that there is a world, there is more to know for God than before there was a world. That's not the case. God knows everything because there are no restraints on his knowledge, as there is for the human being. Why is there a restraint for the human being? Because the human being and the subject are two separate things. So if he is going to master the subject, he has to leave his own condition. He has to leave the space in which he exists and enter into the space where the subject exists. So he is governed to some degree and temporarily. He is governed by the conditions and the properties of the subject. With each subject, he masters and overcomes another restriction. But with God, where there are no restrictions, because everything is within him, he and the subject are not two separate things. Therefore, his knowledge of that subject is an automatic one, an effortless one. He doesn't enter into the subject to know it. He knows it because there's no cause, there's no restraint to his knowledge. And therefore, he and his knowledge are one. Let's go back to the text. Just as no created being can understand the essence of the Creator himself, in the same way, it is impossible to understand the nature of his knowledge, because he and his knowledge are one. His knowledge is as infinite as he himself. We have only to believe that God's knowledge is above our knowledge. That God is one, indivisible, that he and his knowledge are absolutely one and the same. And in that knowledge of self, in other words, in his condition of knowledge, he automatically knows and recognizes all that is, higher and lower, because there is no distinction between higher and lower. If you're studying the subject based on its conditions, if it's a higher thought, you have to study it one way. If it's a lower concept, you have to study it another way. But God knows the higher and the lower equally, because he knows it within himself, not from the subjects. He knows even the smallest creature in the oceans, until the slightest worm in the earth. There is nothing concealed from him. And this knowledge does not add anything to him, and it is not parts that compose him. Since the knowledge comes from him, not from the subject. And he and his knowledge are one, and therefore the difference between the human intelligence and the divine intelligence, in that human intelligence adds and changes the person who has the intelligence, whereas with God, the fact that the world was created does not change his knowledge, just as it doesn't change him. And because this is hard for us, very difficult to imagine and to picture in our minds, that's why the prophet says, that as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. And it also says, if you seek God, will you be able to find? In other words, you can't understand God. with the physical eyes, can you see godliness as you would see physical things. Because a person sees and understands things with a knowledge that is outside of himself, in addition to himself. And God, God knows everything by knowing himself, not outside himself, but within himself. Till here is the expression of the statement of the Rambam. This is all written in Yisei HaTorah of the Rambam, and in Kabbalah there is agreement with him on the statement, as is explained in the Sefer Pardes, which was written by Reb Moshe Kardevero. In the Hayom Yom, for the 22nd day of Sivan, the Rebbe writes that Avas Olam, in the davening, when we say Avas Olam, at the words V'havi'enu l'sholem, we bring together the two front tzitzis. Then we add to them, we join to them the tzitzis of the left back corner, and then the tzitzis of the right back corner, holding them together, all four of them, between the little finger and the ring finger of the left hand. Then we kiss the tzitzis 6 times. At the words tzitzis, and then again where the word tzitzis appears, then the 3rd time where it says litzitzis, and then at the end of the Shema, where we say the word emes, Shem Elokeichem emes, and then in the paragraph after the Shema, by the words kayemes and by the word la'ad.